In this episode of Brainpower, we're going to talk about AI ethics, security, and privacy. Let's jump in. Hello, friends. It's Josh. So glad you're here. Today is going to be yet again a different type of show. Typically, I like to do hands-on with AI, but sometimes we need to have a different conversation about current state and what is happening with the technology. It's just a weird technology, and there are many things happening with it in the background that we should discuss as we move forward so that you are confident in the way that you use it and understand what are the risks and how you can mitigate those risks. All right. Now, typically, I have a handout for each episode. I will get a handout to you if you go to my website /Brainpower. For those of you watching it live, hang tight. I'm going to summarize this presentation, get some notes together for you, some action items, and put that in the download file coming soon. All right. So thanks for your patience there. And with that, let's go ahead and jump in and talk about AI ethics, privacy, and security. And I'll try to put it through the lens of L&D. It's a big topic. So, odds are we'll be talking about how it impacts learning and development. So the first thing I want to get into are the concepts that we're going to be going over, topics, a little bit of history. We're talking about technology. This is the relationship between us and technology. I want to illustrate how some things change, the more they remain the same. Then we'll get into privacy, security, talk about bias, fairness, and representation. Philosophically, what does this mean if AI is smarter than us? And then at the end, I just want to briefly touch upon how ethics goes into an AI policy. All right. Well, let's go ahead. Let's jump into our topic for the day. I have a few quotes to go over. The first is from Stephen Hawking. The development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. His slant on this is AI becoming smarter than humans and self-correcting itself and continuing to propagate. And what does that mean, right? And these questions come up. And so the big ethical question is, what happens when OpenAI releases GPT-5? In a recent presentation, they were comparing different models to marine biology, to where GPT-4 is like a shark and GPT-5 in physical relationship is a whale. What does that mean? They couldn't say specifically what that means. But if GPT-5 is smarter than a human and it's performing advanced tasks, how does that show up? We just don't know. Some people may know already, but we don't. And so that's one thing that we have to navigate. Here's another quote. This is from Leo Shireen, and he has been an advisor for multiple presidents going back into the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I think even won the Presidential Freedom Award. The computer is incredibly fast, accurate, and stupid. Man is unbelievably slow and accurate and brilliant. The marriage of the two is a force beyond calculation. Talk about some insight going way back in the 1900s. Leo had the idea right. But one thing that is the difference here is, what if the machines are not stupid anymore? What does that mean? And part of this is what comes into play with nefarious activities with AI. Of course, yes, we want to do great and amazing things with artificial intelligence, but we know the human condition. And unfortunately, there's some bad actors out there, bad apples, right? What does that mean when publicly available AI goes beyond what humans can do? And I'm afraid that we will find this answer out here shortly in the next few years. My hope, and I'm an optimist, is that through guardrails, through laws, that these protections will advance the technology and prohibit, or not fully eliminate, but again, put some barriers up for those individuals or groups that want to use AI for nefarious purposes. All right, well, let's get into it. All right, so in regards to ethics, privacy, security, with education technology, huge conversation. How does this show up for our associates? What does this mean for our organizations that want to use AI? As an L&D function, I believe part of the advancement within an organization is AI literacy. Who owns that? Well, L&D should own that, obviously through the direction of leadership and even HR. But at the end of the day, when it comes to human performance and the relationship with AI, learning and development should take the lead. And as part of that conversation, when you talk about AI literacy, these topics of ethics, privacy, and especially security when it comes to corporate IP are front and center. History lesson, let's go back. As I mentioned earlier, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And in regards to education technology, there have been touch points throughout history to where, as a society, we have an introduction of technology, and we take a step back and look to see what kind of influence and impact is this going to make on human performance? How does this look? How does this show up? And again, just like any technology, you have individuals, you have groups that vocally protest. This is the way that we've done it. Now we have this new technology that is going to make us stupid, or change the way that, from a pedagogical standpoint, it shows up. And I have to say that teachers are extremely challenged these days, trying to navigate the AI waters, trying to figure out exactly how does it show up in primary and secondary education. Very challenging. Okay, first, let's go ahead and talk about B.F. Skinner's teaching machine. This was pretty simple. This was enter in a question in paper tape, and this dial actually had answers all the way around it. And so this was the first real kind of question and answering machine. What changed, or what was the difference here? This was the first device that could be duplicated or created and start affecting outcomes at scale. And during this time, go back to 1954, that, again, they had to take a look at, like, well, what does this mean? What if the information on the dial was wrong? right? So again, there were considerations for this, and then questions began to arise around access, around equity. Whereas before, the only question was, is there a public school available to where the local population could go, at least here in the States? That was the question. To access equal education across the country. Now we have a device that could impact education, and we have those questions of scaling and those questions of access come up. Let alone, hey, are the answers on the disk correct? Okay, let's keep rolling, because again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Let's talk about Plato. So in the late 1960s, we finally get computers showing up on the scene, delivering the first computer-based training. And yet again, the same questions come up in regards to access and equity, the haves and have-nots. Who is going to get access to this machine? And is it having an impact on education? The content that is created inside the computer training, right? Even in Plato, there were concerns about bias. There were concerns about quality. And then the question from a pedagogical standpoint is, what does this mean for teachers? How do they fit this into a learning journey? What does that look like? When you have to physically take people and put them in front of a monitor and a keyboard. Very expensive, right? So very few people had this. And also, what about student engagement? Again, new devices, new way of consuming information, consuming content from an educational standpoint. How is that showing up? And what does that mean to the human condition? The BBC back in the 70s had Open University, and this was the leveraging of TV and doing online education. Now, I mean, there was other things happening too, like Sesame Street, right? It shows up different when you're talking like K through 5 type quality information versus what was on Open University. But again, we're talking about access, the television. What were again, the pedagogical setup or associated elements that were part of this broadcast? Did you have printouts? Did you have job aids for each of these? And they did, right? To help support the content that was broadcast. But again, from an access standpoint, you'd have to have TV. You'd have to have reception. Some people didn't have that. And there was criticisms of these platforms. Limited interactivity. Think about, again, this is the asynchronous experience. Where's the actions or interactivity? Now we have it where it's bidirectional, right? So I can go to the comments section and look at your comments here live, and we can have a conversation live. And again, back then it was very one directional. There's also the question of isolation. And what does that mean when we have learners that are not with their peers? That's happening today. Heck, it's the conversations around workers, right? And working hybrid, and how some believe it can work, others believe it can't. So we still have these same conversations today. Here comes the personal computer back in the 80s. This is actually fascinating. This is the Apple Lisa, which each of these systems was 10 grand. And this photo is taken from I believe Michigan State. Like Michigan State spent in today's dollars like 2.3 mil on this computer lab. Back in the early 80s, these systems were about 10K, and today's price is like 24,000 for each of these, right? So there's cost. The have and have nots. Not everyone's going to be able to access a computer. So the creation of the digital divide comes into play. Even more of an amplification of equity in education comes into play. When I was in college, I was very lucky because I had access to early Apple technology, specifically for visual design, the early Macs. A lot of people didn't have access to that. And what's fascinating is even within the student body, you were definitely in an elite group if you had your own Mac in your dorm room. Like that was rare because of the cost of these computers. But now, as the systems become more sophisticated, we now have new issues coming into play, like surveillance and monitoring, right? These systems now begin to have memory and storage, not just dummy terminals, but the ability to actually store information. And now those questions come up. What does that mean when we can track what a student is doing? My goodness, I mean, think about what's happening today with our phones. I have a conversation with my son, an off conversation about cowboy boots. And then within that afternoon, I'm getting ads in my Facebook feed about cowboy boots. Right? I mean, these are things that we deal with every single day. But now with computer storage, the question of surveillance and monitoring is front and center. Let's talk about learning management systems. Open systems or systems that were widely used back in the early 2000s, like Moodle and Blackboard. Amazing advancements. Being able to go ahead and put organization to the online experience was critical for the advancement of online education in general. But yet again, we had these questions about tracking, about the quality of the content that's being delivered online, about the bias that could be in the information that's online. This is where we first get online assessments. What are the equity in assessments? Now, the question of equity in assessments has been around for a long time, ever since the paper tests, right? From a cultural standpoint, what does that mean if you get a certain type of question, but that's not part of your reality? In standardized testing, that's been around for quite some time. But now what we have with Moodle and Blackboard and these other learning management systems that come up in the 2000s, now we have it at scale. Again, the issue of data security is coming up. When your student credentials, or even work credentials, if it's a corporate LMS, what does that mean? When you have your personal information inside of the system. So now, and you see where this is going. Notice how, through time, as more power and more compute and more data and more storage comes into play, we have bigger ethical, privacy, and security issues. How about that? What a conundrum that we have. On the one hand, you have this amazing power, and from an educational standpoint, we can advance the human race and society. Because if we didn't have Teams and Zoom and WebEx during COVID, where would we be? How could companies even function? But now, those platforms can record everything and transcribe everything. What does that mean from a privacy standpoint as an associate? Right? It's this balance. that we have to take. What else do we have here? Oh, let's move it on up to today. So the example that I have here is AI enabled technology. So I'm jumping a little bit ahead, going from the 2000s to 2024. Like what was happening in between? Well, compute gets better, our access to technology gets better with mobile phones, our internet connections are faster, right? You're watching this live or watching the recording of this. Pretty amazing. So the example I have here is Conmingo. If you're not familiar with Conmingo, this is the AI chatbot that is the assistant for the students that are on Khan Academy. And Khan Academy has foundational or even advanced classes that are targeting students, mostly grades 6 through 12, at least here in the States, right? That grade range. But what does it mean when we have an AI bot that could potentially be tracking individual conversations about how somebody is learning? That goes in a level even deeper. And so some of the same concerns that we've had for decades upon decades, bias, accuracy, right? Because now we're using AI and hallucinations come into play. What does that mean from a chatbot standpoint? Are the students getting the correct information? Are the guardrails up on that chatbot? Is it working properly? Does it continue to work properly? Do we have the correct resources in place from a performance support standpoint to make sure that if the models change, if the information changes, our associates, or in this case, students, are getting the correct information? What data is being collected? How is it being used? So again, questions of surveillance come back up. So we have, taken a look at education technology from, all the way from the 1950s to today. And the story is the same. As compute, as data, as the pipes expand, bigger ethical, privacy, and security questions come into play. And so what does that mean when AI becomes more human than human? Now we get into philosophical issues, and I'm going to get into that towards the end. All right, so let's go in and let's tackle some of these items one at a time here. So, as I mentioned, in regards to privacy and security in a learning ecosystem, now I'm talking about what's behind your corporate firewall and all the tools and platforms that you have that your associates can access. Data privacy is huge. And what's funny is, like with AI, what does that mean when an associate works with AI? Or what does that mean when an associate in their role, a learning path, is generated by AI? Maybe it's incorrect. Maybe it takes them down the wrong path. Huh, that's interesting. Then we have all the security challenges with AI. Corporate IP. My goodness, what an issue that is today. Most surveys out there show that 25% of corporations, at least here in the States, have an AI policy. But here's the kicker. 75% of associates are using AI. My gosh, what's going on with the 50% of those companies that, or 75% of those companies that don't have an AI policy, and you have all those associates running around using AI? What's going on with the corporate IP? That's a massive security issue. And so as we move forward and we have tools that have AI in them, those are going to have to be vetted out by IT, and got to verify if you do upload, corporate information into them from a security standpoint, does it check, right? So data privacy is massive. Having legal and ethical frameworks in place for data privacy is key. And we know what happens when there's data breaches. This happens all the time. Man, what a pain when you get that letter that, your password, your credit card information is compromised. Ugh, right? What does that mean if your corporate information is compromised? That it's actually uploaded into a model that could be used for training that model, and a competitor could get access to it, even tangentially within the model itself, or explicitly asking, hey, how would this company go about solving this problem? Ooh, man, that would be dangerous, right? So data privacy is huge. Here's an example. Microsoft, with the latest versions of the Windows operating system, have a tool that can record everything you do in the computer, so that I can go back 30 days from now, query, and say, hey, what task was I performing in Photoshop to get that effect? And I can go back and watch it over. Whoa. I mean, that's pretty cool. Because sometimes we do things so fast that we would love to go back and review it. Hey, that's great. But my gosh, what if somebody got a hold of that shouldn't have that information? Right? Again, with more power, we have bigger questions that come up. So this recall feature, if it got into the wrong hands, could have just huge impact, especially, my gosh, if it was a competing company, or from a national security standpoint. It's crazy to think about the impact there. Now, here's a great quote. This is from Dr. Jen Goldbach, and she's at University of Maryland. The recall feature could pose a potential nightmare if the device falls into the wrong hands. So what does that mean when we have these new Copilot PCs that have the built-in AI, and within the operating system, we have a recall feature? We must be diligent with our privacy, both our personal privacy and our corporate privacy. Because if you think about it, what's the new oil? Data. Data is the new oil, meaning that the more data that a company can collect, the more powerful they can make their AI systems. And so as we move forward, just be mindful that, and we saw this, and you're going to see an example here shortly with Adobe. Adobe recently changed their terms of service that just rocked everybody that uses the Adobe platform, about how they could potentially take your work within those applications and use it for training data. And it was worded in such a way that that possibility was there. Of course, immediately there was a backlash, and Adobe backtracked, and they're updating their terms of service to say, no, we're not going to go ahead and train on your data. But again, the possibility is there. So again, keep that in mind as you begin to work with more AI tools. What type of data collection mechanism is in play, and does it impact your personal privacy and your company's privacy? Oh, and there it is, right? So this is really funny, because again, Adobe changes their terms of service. People freak out. I mean, people were already upset years ago at Adobe when they stopped selling physical pieces of software like CD-ROMs, and said, well, you're going to have to rent the software per month. People really didn't like that too much. And then now we have this data collection functionality, however you want to frame it, and people are upset. But check it out. Within days, Adobe comes back and says, whoa, 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 wait a second. We didn't mean that. It read like we were going to go ahead and take your information and train our AI systems on it, but no, that's not the case. So now they got to update their terms of service again, right? And this, so you got to be, again, aware what's happening out there with your platforms, with your vendors. What is their terms of service? All of them. If you are creating content, if you're uploading information, whatever the case may be, how does that show up across your learning ecosystem? What are the terms of service in regards to privacy and security of that data? So with security and AI, we're talking about access to information, again, protections around corporate IP. This is also data poisoning. Well, what the heck is that? Well, believe it or not, you can inject information into an AI system through the use of prompts. And this has been illustrated by individuals prompting ChatGPT and other systems over and over again, so that when another user has a question about a product or has a question about some service, that the marketing information is injected into the system, and that particular company is identified as one of the solutions. Because, of course, people are going into ChatGPT and using it like Google, right? There's also hacks of going in and putting metadata into images or messing around with pixels so that when images are uploaded into an AI, it messes with the information there. And then you can just have attacks into the system, into the vector database itself. I don't see too much of that happening. I don't read too much about that, but that's entirely possible. The actual AI systems or architecture is attacked. Sure, why not? You hear about it all the time where associates that are let go or fired, they're disgruntled, they will go ahead and nuke servers. They will erase a server. What does that happen with an AI model? Oh my gosh. Can you imagine having processes in place and something major happens to where you can't access that model for days or weeks, or you can't access it anymore? What does that mean? That's huge. Here's an example. National Archives bans employee use of ChatGPT. So they're taking security to the nth degree, not even allowing associates to use ChatGPT within their environment. You see this a lot. Depending upon risk and risk mitigation, it really just shows up differently across various organizations. They're just going to go ahead and block it. There's another one talking about software programming. So for those of you that are not familiar, like one of the features of utilizing ChatGPT or a large language model is its ability to create programming code, right? I mean, many of us use ChatGPT to go ahead and create text-based content, but it can also do programming for you. Well, check this out. AI hallucinates software packages and devs download them, even potentially poisoned with malware. So from a programming standpoint, these pieces of software that are being auto-generated, that are being created by the large language model, could have malware baked into the code, either referencing or accessing external systems or data or whatever the case may be. That's wild. To think that artificial intelligence could have the poison pill inside of it. What are the protections around that if we begin to automate our code? And it could be as simple as using JavaScript and putting an additional functionality into Articulate Rise or Storyline or Captivate. And there's some access or some code in there that points to a site that it shouldn't be pointing to. Ooh, that's dangerous. Let's switch topics and go into bias, fairness, and representation. Earlier, when I was talking about the history of education technology, this was a constant. As more data and more information were being placed inside of systems, then the question comes up about the bias within the system. Even with early paper tests, right? There was questions about how the questions were formulated, the topics in the questions, and the bias within there. Fairness in regards to access of systems. And then are we representing, or I'm sorry, do communities have representation across the usage of these systems and the promotion of fairness across these systems? Huge questions. Let's talk about bias. Inherently, AI just has bias in it, right? Think about the training data. So within the training data itself, it's a representation of humans, of society, specifically slanted towards English. I mean, there's more when you talk about foundation models like ChatGPT or GPT-4, 4.0, Anthropic Claude, Google Gemini. Those foundation models have been trained on so much data that within that data set, you see human bias come into play. And so what the guardrails that are placed within these systems, they try to overcome that bias. For instance, like in Midjourney, if you ask Midjourney to create an image, or even Dolly to create an image of a CEO, what are the odds it's going to be a white male? Pretty darn high, at least initially, until humans come back in and course correct and readjust to have more inclusion in there. But out of the gate, all of the images of CEOs over the years, primarily white males, that comes into play. So this is going to progress over time. So keep in mind of the bias within just AI. How does it show up? If you're not familiar, Workday is a human capital management system similar to like SAP or Oracle. Workday urges judge to toss bias class action over AI hiring software. This, I believe this was about ageism. And so you had a gentleman who in 2023 was excluded from the running of a job because of his age, and he took it to court. And this is still playing out today. This case itself can have a huge impact on leveraging AI within hiring practices. And you know, what's funny is that this isn't the only court case that's out there that's going to have a huge impact on AI in general, like copyright. All that's playing out in the courts too. It should be interesting to see how this goes down in regards to a judgment, because I know that there are many vendors that are out there within talent management that are currently leveraging AI. And it's been used for years too, you know, to scan resumes. So what does that mean, right? What does that mean as far as the types of associates that are being hired? How far is AI being used in the talent recruitment function? Fascinating. Let's talk about fairness. Access to AI. Defining what it is. What does fair mean? Right, when it comes to access. Hey, you know, ChatGPT is free as long as you have an internet connection, right? And even after, like, you know, 30 years of the internet, having access to the internet, there's still many, many pockets of society that do not have access to the internet, or they have extremely slow connections. And what do you need to run AI properly, or at least to experience it properly? A fast connection. What are the measurements around fairness? That's even a question within itself. What are the strategies from a societal standpoint to help promote AI and to get access to it, right? My fear is that we are going to have systems that eventually are going to be smarter than humans. Who has access to those systems? You're going to notice, I'm getting off on a little tangent here, but at least within the states, that recently the US government has tasked the Department of Justice to step it up in regards to monitoring what's going on at Google, Microsoft, OpenAI on these AI systems. Why is that? Well, what if they create a system that's smarter than the human that can then game the stock market? What about that? I mean, what if the system could go in and with a set of data know exactly what's going to happen based upon probability to a stock price over the next 7 to 10 days? But you know what? Only a certain group of people have access to that. I mean, I'm getting way out of bounds because we want to try to keep it in L&D. But the same thing comes up with corporate intellectual property, any other kind of educational system, or whatever the case may be. Again, when we have an AI system that's more human than human, and only a certain number of people have access to it, what is the impact of that? I don't have an answer to that, but it's a question that is going to constantly be coming up as this technology progresses, and it's something you should keep track of. Or, so one of the other things that's happening is that these firms are putting security and advisory committees together internally. Well, big deal, right? I mean, we have to have some balance out there, and hopefully the US government, you see this in Europe, you see this at least from a state standpoint with California, putting in guardrails for protections. But these companies that say, oh, no, we'll be able to go ahead and self-regulate or put our own security together. Again, here's another bias issue. Meta created an AI advisory council that's composed entirely of white men. There you go. That kind of boils it down, right? So representation, even within advisory committees or security committees, the makeup of these private corporations, inherently there's issues. Okay, so let's touch upon the philosophical. Let's get into the philosophical. So what does it mean when, again, we have systems that are more human than human? What does it mean from a knowledge retention and knowledge distribution standpoint? And I want to bring it back to, there was a point in time when calculators came out, right? I like this example because it kind of like boils it down to where philosophically, what does it mean when we have a machine that can go in and solve a problem, right? Does it change the way that humans show up? And it does. What does that mean for a domain or a discipline like engineering, excuse me, or mathematics? Right? But what does it happen when it's at scale? I'm just going to cough here for a second. Sorry. Yeah, what does it mean? And what are the ethical considerations around that? And what is the future of work? When you have individuals that are out there that are talking about having everybody have a wage, right? Just being paid for existing because AI has all the jobs. It's pretty massive. I mean, I don't know how that's going to play out, but let's just break it down from a knowledge standpoint. Let's break it down for L&D. So what if we have systems that could take a SME interview or multiple SME interviews and completely build out an entire learning journey. I'm talking the whole thing, everything from awareness to priming to the content to performance support to post training to analyzing what's happening with the knowledge gaps and what's going on with KPIs and course correcting and readjusting the training itself for humans. What if that's fully automated? Then what? I don't know if we'll ever get to that because I believe in human, AI, human, and we will be orchestrating. I mean, I love a timeline like anybody else in creating content. Matter of fact, I'm editing some video today or building slides in PowerPoint. So what does it mean when it's all automatically created? Right? So a couple terms. Talking about philosophical. So epistemology, acquiring knowledge. What does that mean when we have GPT-5 and it has all the knowledge ever existing, except for newly generated ideas? But what if it can do that also? What does it mean about our existence and our place in society when we have systems that can do all the work for us? And what does that mean for expertise? What does it mean if a system can outthink a human, make a better design, execute it better, and it just knows more? That's kind of hard to wrap your mind around that something could actually draw a vector between the changing of environments, because that's what we're really good at, right? Like we know based upon changes in an environment, how our training or how our experiences have to change. Well, think about COVID, right? Think about all the pivots that occurred during COVID. Oh my gosh, we have to go hybrid. How does that show up properly for our associates? We have to rethink the way that we deliver training. Some of you are already doing it, but some others were not. Okay, what if AI can figure that out? My hope is that we don't get to that point and that we remain in a partnership with AI. And going back to that first quote about how machines are stupid, right? Technology is fallible. It is going to fail. I can't, it's funny when I go on trips or like go speak or whatever the case may be, how many times technology fails along the way, right? Whether it's checking in or out of a hotel, getting an Uber, your phone, whatever. Actually, that'd be fascinating to track how many times technology fails. And then you put that against an AI. I mean, only last week, OpenAI went down. And then look how many systems it impacted. That was massive. So, that being said, I'm talking about situations or themes that are perfect environments, and we don't have a perfect environment. Heck, we have these data centers that they're building out. What if a hurricane or some kind of environmental situation takes out a data center? Then what? I guess we better have a plan B, right? So, I'm going to bring it back in and I always like to end with some actions and what you can do to be actionable. And I didn't mean to bring the house down in this conversation, but these are things that we need to talk about. But I believe that, as you move forward as a professional, right, it's this relationship that you have with AI. And what does it mean to be an expert in the AI age? Well, again, it's this partnership. And I believe that as a professional, the things that you do today are going to show up differently tomorrow, because in this partnership, some of the mundane tasks that you perform, or if we stretch, maybe there are different types of tasks that you are going to orchestrate, like maybe more data analytics, analyzing data, collecting data. Maybe that's going to be more of what you do, as opposed to building out a RISE course or creating a PowerPoint deck or creating a job aid. As that becomes more automated, now you are the conductor. You are the orchestrator. You are the one who is going to assess, hey, how is this impacting our frontline workers? Or are we truly closing that skill gap? Are we driving towards those sales numbers based upon product knowledge? Am I able, this is a good one, am I able to create brand new experiences that have never been created before with AI? Today I'm doing a recording about GPT-4 Vision. And with GPT-4 Vision, we'll be able to go in and have frontline workers take pictures or use their phone to look at a machine, to look at a point of sale or in retail, setting up a stand at a retail store. Are we doing it right? Is it on brand? At a restaurant, if somebody's plating food, is it to the standard of the restaurant? Get on my phone, take a quick picture of it, or maybe there's a camera overhead as they're plating the food. Wild. Like, again, we haven't really thought of all the various ways that we could leverage these AI technologies, and it's going to change and evolve. So again, you have to be mindful that maybe some of the ways that we've supported associates currently or in the past with courses, maybe that just shows up different. And your job is to figure out, well, based upon our environment, what kind of new experiences can we put out there that changes behavior, that changes habits, right? That even emotionally engages our associates that want to go out and learn. A lot of opportunities. So it's not all doom and gloom. Again, I know like a majority of this conversation is about, hey, be careful. But again, I'm an optimist when it comes to this. Pragmatic, but an optimist that we're going to be able to do all kinds of really cool things with it. Last concept, last topic is your policy. So to bring this all back together about how this shows up is when we're talking about ethics, like bias, we're talking about privacy, your personal privacy, data privacy, and we're talking about security. What do you have in your AI policy that reflects those concepts that we talked about? Do you even have an AI policy? I hope you're driving towards one, or at least your company is. And if not, bring it up in conversation, push it ahead. Because those items are critical for protecting associates, for protecting corporate IP, for representing groups of people when AI shows up behind your corporate firewall. And real quick, when I go and I talk to customers, I'm on site on a customer site, it's amazing how many individuals within companies are just put off by AI because they understand the issues with it. Like, as somebody who's an artist, the copyright issue alone, my goodness, that just like brings up so many negative reactions where I go. I get it. And bias, that too, especially when you within the lens of politics. I don't want to bring up politics, but that comes up also, right? It's in the model. So again, make sure that those areas are represented in your AI policy. Okay, well, I went way over a half hour, and I'm now coming up on 1 hour here. But I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me here today and going over this very, very important topic of ethics, security, and privacy when it comes to AI. This is an ongoing conversation. And at the end of the day, this is a conversation that is the relationship between you and technology. And it's always been that way, right? And when I got into the history earlier, as those technologies progressed, it becomes bigger and bigger conversation. And so these big conversations we need to have. So again, get out there, keep using the technology, be mindful of the risks, and just have fun with it. Okay. All right, my friends. Thank you so much for spending time with me here today. I will see you down the road in the next episode of Brainpower. Take care.